He was the quiet old man in the nursing home who never spoke to anyone for 3 years. No visitors, no phone calls, no conversations. Until the letter found in his room after he died changed the lives of everyone in town. Welcome to Vaulted Secret Stories. Before we begin this powerful story of silence, sacrifice, and a secret that waited 50 years to be told, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button. This story will show you that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who never speak about their heroism. Sunset Manor Nursing Home sat on the edge of Millbrook, a small town where everyone knew everyone's business. The brick building housed 47 residents, each with their own story, their own visitors, their own daily routines. All except Thomas Richardson. Tom had arrived at Sunset Manor 3 years ago on a cold February morning. He carried one small suitcase, wore a faded green jacket, and spoke exactly 7 words to the intake coordinator. "I can pay, just need a room." The staff had tried everything to engage him. Sarah Mitchell, the head nurse with 15 years of experience, had never encountered someone so completely withdrawn. Most residents eventually opened up about their families, their careers, their memories. Tom remained an enigma. He was 82 when he arrived, making him 85 at the end of this story. Average height, thin but not frail. With silver hair he kept neatly combed and gray eyes that seemed to see everything while revealing nothing. He walked with a slight limp and had a small scar above his right eyebrow. Tom's daily routine never varied. He woke at 600 hours. Sarah noticed he kept military time. He would shower, dressing one of his 3 identical outfits: khaki pants, white shirt, and that same faded green jacket. He ate breakfast alone at the corner table, never making eye contact with other residents or staff. After breakfast, he would sit in the sunroom reading old paperback novels from the facility's library. War stories, mostly, though he never discussed them. Lunch was another solitary affair, followed by an afternoon nap. Dinner at precisely 1800 hours, then back to his room where he would listen to an old radio until lights out. He never watched television in the common area, never participated in bingo, craft time, or movie nights, never joined the other residents for their daily walks around the garden. When staff members tried to engage him in conversation, he would nod politely and give one-word responses. Fine, yes, no, thank you. The other residents had theories about Tom. Mrs. Henderson, a retired schoolteacher, believed he was hiding from family members who had mistreated him. Mr. Kowalski, a former factory worker, thought Tom might have been in prison and was ashamed of his past. The younger staff members whispered that he might have dementia or depression. Sarah knew better. She had worked with hundreds of elderly patients, and Tom didn't fit any of those categories. His mind was sharp. She could see it in the way he solved crossword puzzles and the careful attention he paid to news programs on his radio. He wasn't depressed. His appetite was good. He maintained personal hygiene, and he seemed content in his solitude. Tom was making a choice to be silent. The question was why. His medical records provided few clues. He had served in the military. His VA benefits covered part of his care. He had no emergency contacts listed. His previous address had been a small apartment across town that he had rented for only 6 months before moving to Sunset Manor. Before that, the trail went cold. Sarah had tried everything she could think of to connect with him. She brought him coffee the way he liked it, black, no sugar. She updated him on weather changes before his afternoon walks. She even tried asking about his military service. "Thank you for your service, Mr. Richardson," she had said one morning while checking his blood pressure. Tom had looked directly at her for the first time in months. His gray eyes held something that might have been pain, might have been gratitude, might have been regret. Then he had simply nodded and looked away. That was 6 months ago, and it remained the longest eye contact Sarah had ever achieved with Tom Richardson. What nobody knew was that Tom's silence wasn't born from antisocial tendencies or cognitive decline. It was born from guilt, grief, and the weight of carrying stories that he believed no one would want to hear. Tom had been carrying those stories for 50 years. Spring had arrived early in Millbrook, and the nursing home's garden was beginning to show signs of life. Daffodils pushed through the soil near the walking path, and the old oak tree in the courtyard was budding with new leaves. For most residents, spring brought renewed energy and hope. Tom Richardson seemed unaffected by the changing seasons. He maintained his routine with the same quiet determination he had shown for 3 years. But Sarah began noticing small changes that concerned her professional instincts. Tom was eating less at meals, though he still cleared his plate to avoid drawing attention. He was spending more time staring out his window instead of reading his paperback novels. Most tellingly, he had begun organizing his few belongings with methodical precision. Sarah found him one afternoon carefully folding his 3 shirts and placing them in his dresser drawer with military exactness. His books were stacked in a neat pile on his knitstand. His radio, which usually sat on the windowsill, had been placed in the exact center of his small desk. "Spring cleaning, Mr. Richardson?" Sarah asked gently. Tom looked at her with those gray eyes that always seemed to hold more than they revealed. "Something like that," he said quietly. It was the most words he had spoken in weeks. That evening, Sarah mentioned her concerns to Dr. Martinez, the facility's physician. Tom's vital signs were stable, his cognitive function remained sharp, and he showed no signs of acute distress. But something in his demeanor suggested a man who was preparing for something. "Keep an eye on him," Dr. Martinez advised. "Sometimes they know before we do." 3 days later, Tom Richardson had what the medical staff classified as a minor cardiac event. Not a full heart attack, but enough to require monitoring and concern. He spent 2 days in the local hospital, where he remained as quietly cooperative as he had been at the nursing home. When he returned to Sunset Manor, Tom seemed somehow smaller, more fragile. He still maintained his routine, but with less energy and more effort. Sarah began checking on him more frequently, always under the pretense of routine nursing duties. Tom seemed to appreciate the extra attention without acknowledging it directly. He would nod when she entered his room, sometimes even manage a small smile when she updated him on the garden's progress, or the antics of the facility's therapy cat. On a Tuesday morning in late April, Sarah found Tom sitting in his chair by the window, looking out at the oak tree that was now fully green with spring leaves. He seemed peaceful, contemplative, more present than she had seen him in months. "It's a beautiful morning," she commented while checking his medications. "Yes," Tom replied, then added something that surprised her. "Thank you, Sarah." "For what, Mr. Richardson?" "For treating me like a person instead of a problem." Sarah felt a tightness in her throat. In 15 years of nursing, she had learned to recognize when patients were saying goodbye. "You've never been a problem, Mr. Richardson. You've been a gentleman." Tom smiled then, the first genuine smile Sarah had ever seen from him. "I haven't always been a gentleman, but I've tried to be better." That was their last conversation. Thursday morning, Sarah found Tom Richardson in his chair by the window, having passed peacefully in his sleep. His face was calm, his hands folded in his lap, his gray eyes closed forever. On his desk, placed precisely in the center, was an envelope with "For the staff who cared for me," written in careful handwriting. Sarah held the envelope with trembling hands. In 15 years of nursing, she had dealt with death many times, but something about finding Tom Richardson's final message felt profoundly significant. She called Dr. Martinez and the facility administrator, then sat in Tom's room waiting for them to arrive. When they arrived, they found Sarah still holding the envelope, hesitant to open something that felt sacred. "He wanted the staff to have it," Sarah said, "but maybe we should read it together." They sat in Tom's small room, and Sarah carefully opened the envelope. Inside were 3 sheets of lined paper covered in careful handwriting. The letter began simply, "To the kind people who cared for me during my final years. My name is Thomas James Richardson, Sergeant First Class, United States Army, 1st Cavalry Division. I served in Vietnam from March 1970 to February 1972. I have been silent about my service for 50 years, not from shame, but from guilt. This letter contains the story I could never tell while I was alive, but which deserves to be told after I am gone. On November 15th, 1971, I was leading a 12-man reconnaissance patrol in Quang Tri Province when we were ambushed by North Vietnamese forces. We were outnumbered, cut off from radio contact, and surrounded in hostile territory. 11 of my men were wounded, some critically. I was the only one uninjured, and I was faced with a choice that has haunted me every day for 50 years. I could attempt to fight our way out, likely losing several men in the process. I could wait for rescue that might never come while my wounded soldiers died, or I could surrender our position and hope for medical treatment for my men. I chose a 4th option that I have never forgiven myself for. I left them." Sarah's voice caught as she read those words aloud. Dr. Martinez leaned forward, and Administrator Johnson sat motionless as the weight of Tom's confession filled the small room. The letter continued. "I told my men I was going for help. I promised I would return with medical support and evacuation. I believed I could reach our firebase, organize a rescue mission, and return before any of my soldiers died from their wounds. I was wrong. It took me 18 hours to reach friendly forces. When I returned with a full medical and combat team, we found the position overrun. My 12 men were gone, not dead, but captured. Evidence suggested they had been taken prisoner 6 hours after I left them. I have spent 50 years wondering if my men thought I abandoned them. I have spent 50 years wondering if they died believing their sergeant was a coward who ran when they needed him most. I have spent 50 years carrying the weight of a decision that saved no one and failed everyone. For 5 decades, I have been unable to speak about my service because every word felt like a betrayal of the men I left behind. How do you accept thanks for your service when you believe your service was a failure? How do you wear the label of veteran when you feel like a deserter? I never married because I felt unworthy of love. I never had children because I feared passing on the shame I carried. I never spoke about Vietnam because every story felt like a lie. But I am dying now, and I realize that my silence has been another form of abandonment. Not just of my men, but of their families who have spent 50 years wondering what happened to their sons, their brothers, their fathers. If anyone reading this letter has the resources to investigate military records, I am asking you to find the families of these 12 men and tell them that Sergeant Richardson never forgot them, never stopped thinking about them, and never forgave himself for leaving them behind. The letter then listed 12 names, each one written with careful precision, each one representing a life that Tom had carried in his silence for half a century. The letter concluded, "I do not know if these men survived the war. I do not know if they made it home to their families. Military records from that time and place are incomplete, and my own trauma prevented me from pursuing information that might have brought closure to their loved ones. But I know their names. I know their faces. I know they were good soldiers who trusted their sergeant to bring them home safely. I failed them then, but perhaps this letter can serve them now. I have lived in silence for 50 years, but I do not want to die in silence. Please help me speak for the men who may no longer have voices. With gratitude for your kindness and regret for my failures, Thomas James Richardson, Sergeant First Class, United States Army." The room fell silent as Sarah finished reading. 3 people sat surrounded by the belongings of a man who had carried an impossible weight for 50 years. Within hours, Tom Richardson's final message had been shared with military historians and veteran organizations. The search began immediately for the families of the 12 men whose names Tom had preserved. The response to Tom Richardson's letter was immediate and overwhelming. Military historians recognized the significance of the detailed account. Veteran organizations began cross-referencing the names against databases. Most importantly, family members began reaching out. The first breakthrough came within days. Military records confirmed that 7 of Tom's 12 men had survived capture and returned home during prisoner exchanges in 1972 and 1973. They had lived full lives after the war, raising families and building careers. The most significant call came from Phoenix, Arizona. Staff Sergeant David Murphy, now 72 years old, had been one of the wounded men Tom left behind to seek help. He had survived 14 months as a prisoner of war and returned home in 1973. For 50 years, he had been searching for Sergeant Tom Richardson, wanting to thank him for saving his life. "Richardson didn't abandon us," David told the military historian who contacted him. "He saved us. We all knew he was going for help. We believed he would come back, and that belief kept us alive during captivity." David explained what Tom had never known. The North Vietnamese had originally planned to execute the wounded Americans rather than transport them. But Tom's successful escape had alerted United States forces to the missing patrol. The ensuing search operations made the prisoners valuable for intelligence and prisoner exchanges. "Tom Richardson spent 50 years thinking he failed us," David said, his voice breaking. "But he's the reason I came home. He's the reason I had a family, a career, a life after Vietnam." David immediately made arrangements to travel to Millbrook to pay his respects to the sergeant who had died, believing he was a failure. Over the following weeks, 6 other families learned that their fathers, brothers, and sons had been part of Tom Richardson's unit, had survived because of his decision to seek help, and had lived full lives after the war. David Murphy arrived in Millbrook, carrying a small American flag and 50 years of gratitude he had never been able to express. Sarah Mitchell met him at the nursing home, introducing him to the woman who had cared for Tom during his final years. Standing in room 23B, surrounded by Tom's modest belongings, David shared the story Tom had never heard, how his decision to seek help had saved 7 lives, how his men had never doubted his courage, and how they had spent decades searching for their sergeant to thank him. "He was alone here," Sarah said softly. 3 years and no visitors, no calls. He died thinking no one remembered him. 7 of us never forgot him," David replied. "We just couldn't find him." David was a small, weathered man with kind eyes and hands that showed the wear of 40 years in manual labor. He walked with a slight limp from the shrapnel wound he had received in 1971, a permanent reminder of the day Tom Richardson had promised to bring help. "I need you to know," David told Sarah, "that man was a hero. I don't know what he told himself about that day in Vietnam, but he was wrong about failing us. He saved us." David walked to the window where Tom had spent countless hours looking out at the oak tree. "After Tom left to get help, we knew we were in trouble.